Hi there, everybody, and welcome to the Growth Execution Podcast. Mark McCallion here, your host. I'm focused very much on how you can help to launch your business at this time, early 2021. We're coming to the end in the UK of our third lockdown, and there is plenty to be excited about this year. So we are focused on building you the capacity and capability to really put your back into getting this business of yours out fresh, working correctly for the market. I'm delighted to be joined this week by Scott Anderson of Doubledare. Hi there, Scott. How you doing?
Great, Mel. Thank you.
Great. It's really, really good to have you on. Now, tell us, you've got a few businesses, I think, on the go. And certainly you've been part of a few launches over your time.
Yes.
I wonder, what inspires you to create businesses and to get your businesses up and running?
That's a great question. And I think, there's entrepreneurs are different. Each of us are a little bit different, but I think we all share this sort of fascination with new ideas and particularly solving problems in a new way. And, that's always been the intrigue for me. I'm convinced that some of entrepreneurship is somewhat genetic. I come from a long line of entrepreneurs going back many generations. And it means, in our family, it means that you're big risk takers, very comfortable with risk, sometimes kind of erratic personalities, eccentric personalities. Fun at parties, but not always completely stable. And so I think some of it is definitely genetic. And the other part of it is, I was just born into a family where starting a business was a totally normal way to go. And going to a job was not. That would have been, for a lot of families, it would have been as unusual to go to work for someone as it would be in a lot of families to start a business. Yeah. Well, so it was very normalized in my family. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. And if, so I think for many people, and as you kind of allude to, that's not, the jump is quite extreme or quite fear-inspiring
Yes.
in many people who perhaps haven't had that experience or haven't had those templates to sort of work towards.
That's right.
What do you? I know obviously. So your business, and we'll talk about that in detail soon as well. You're a coach. You work very closely with individual leaders. What do you find is the sort of is there a common sort of traits that you see in those that perhaps aren't born with it, but work towards it?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are people in my family. My sister, for example, is not an entrepreneurial person, and we grew up in the same place and share some of the same genetics. Again, I think there's a pretty fierce independent streak, wanting to do things yourself. And actually that can be a real trap for entrepreneurs that I've coached, is this. It gets the business started, but it's difficult to delegate. It's difficult to let go. So it can be kind of a blessing and a trap. But there's definitely that I'm going to get this done myself. I'm not going to wait for anybody to give me permission. I'm just going to go get it done, and I'm going to sort of control my own destiny. Also, there's typically kind of a real competitive streak. At least that's what I've seen. I have that, and most of my clients have that. I want to see how I can do on my own versus the status quo is a big part of it. But there definitely is. I mean, whether you're genetically predisposed or whether it's nurture or nature, there's still a big jumping off point. No matter how risk tolerant you may be, and it seems like it's that. What helps is that real independent urge to do things oneself and to make things happen, and to kind of compete in a certain way.
Yeah. And one of the things I think that has come out very much from of recent times, the pandemic particularly, over here in the UK, the stats are that over the last 6 months of last year, 2020, 38% more businesses were incorporated at Companies House than had been the previous year.
Yes.
So obviously, perhaps many listening to this will be in their first time of setting out on this journey. They perhaps
Right.
sat in lockdown and thought very hard about their idea. What do you think is the biggest kind of sort of piece of advice you can give them that will help them to be successful in business?
Sure. That statistic is so interesting. It's the same, more or less the same way in the US. And the same thing happened in the Great Recession of 2008, that there's this explosion of companies that we now take for granted. Airbnb, Uber, all of these companies were started in the Great Recession of 2008. And there are a lot of parallels, I think, with the 2020, except that we also had this sort of isolation and maybe more focused time to think about it.
Yeah.
The most important aspect to me is, and it's kind of a two-sided coin, but it's to really understand the pain or the problem that you're solving, and to really understand it in 360 degrees. I've started a total of 9 businesses, and some of my earliest businesses weren't as much about trying to solve a problem as make a point. And that I thought I had a brilliant insight, and didn't bother very much with finding out whether anybody had this problem or not, or whether my solution was any good. Having started 9 businesses, I'm really looking back on it now, and the key to it, I think, is to really truly understand and immerse yourself in the pain, in the problem, so that you can articulate it. I forget who said this. Someone said, if you can articulate the pain that other people are having better than they can, they will assume that you have the answer to it. And I think that there's some truth in that, but more importantly, to have a genuine answer. The one problem I found with COVID is that there is and also just with, I think entrepreneurs generally, is that they probably don't share their ideas as much as they should with a mentor, or even a coach, or friends, or with somebody, and it can become an echo chamber. And our ideas are our babies, and they're very beautiful to us. But until we take them out in the pram and show them around and see if everybody thinks it's a beautiful baby, we can make some terrible mistakes. So getting as much feedback as possible is, I think, probably the most important thing. Getting very clear about the pain, and the best way to do that is to really get the input of a lot of people.
Yeah, I love that. And that analogy about the babies is one that I use myself, actually, and particularly around when people have to hear that their baby is ugly, and just how devastating that can be emotionally. And how you're going to want to coach around at that point, right?
Yeah. Or somebody to talk to anyway, maybe not
exactly,
but someone.
And you can, in glorious isolation, spend a lot of time. Again, perhaps people, over recent times have not had the opportunity to go out, test the market, try and find product market fit as much as they would have done under other times.
Exactly.
But I do think that by getting that feedback, and by being able to assimilate it, and being relatively unemotional about it, that's so important to being able to see your business survive and to get to product market fit, right?
The Clubhouse app is so good for this. There are so many entrepreneurial rooms in Clubhouse, and just to drop in and put your baby up for exhibit, and is so valuable. Yeah, look at this beautiful type.
What do you think? Yeah.
But Clubhouse and social media generally is very useful. Mastermind groups, whether they're formal or informal, are so useful for finding out what your baby's all about in reality.
Yeah, I think that's great. And so there are Clubhouse invites out and about if anybody needs one. So we run the Growth Execution Group on Facebook. So there's people in there that you can come and have a look at. Anybody listening who wants to have a go on Clubhouse is really, really interesting. I think its growth itself has been absolutely fascinating, right? Just how
absolutely, and a perfect example, of what you're saying. A perfect example of a business that didn't exist, until I think it was January of 2020 or February 2020, something like that. But it's just exploded. And really simple, really great idea. But it's, one of those opportunities to defeat the echo chamber that happens particularly in COVID, but to entrepreneurs generally.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And in terms of your business, you obviously come from, as you say, a long line of entrepreneurs. Were you always kind of geared up to starting businesses, or did you ever think about doing the radical thing of going and getting a normal job?
I had a couple of jobs, and I worked for a company once that called First Data Resources, which is ultimately got bought by American Express, and I don't know what conglomerate owns it now, but it's a company that was the first credit card processing company in the world. And you can imagine how fascinating processing credit card, that's a pretty fascinating business.
Very lucrative business. I know.
Oh, lucrative, maybe, yeah. But I had just sold, at 25, my father died suddenly at a pretty young age, and I had greatness thrust upon me at a very young age. So at 25, I was running some family businesses and I was soggy behind the ears, and it was not pretty. But anyway, we sold those businesses to our employees, and after that, I somehow thought I should get a job, and so I worked for 9 months for this credit card processing company. And I just wanted to peel my skin back. I just couldn't stand it. And the anonymity of it was for my sensitive entrepreneurial ego, or I don't know what it was, but the monotony of it, the bureaucracy of it was just so horrible.
Yeah.
And that was the last time, over the last 30 years, I've signed my own paycheck all but 9 months. And just because it was just such an awful, for me, I was a terrible employee, god awful. And, that's the main thing. I suppose if I had been successful, maybe I'd still do it, but I was just terrible employee.
Do you know what? I think you kind of know, don't you? you understand. Yeah. Once you get that understanding of yourself and what flips your buttons and what gets you moving, I think that's a really important. Self-awareness is very important, I think, in choosing your career and choosing your business.
And I say this with, it's because probably of my own immaturity and my short attention span. And, it's not any virtue on my part that really led me to be an entrepreneur. I couldn't hack it, to be perfectly obvious. I really just couldn't hack it as an employee. And my hat is off to those who can.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that kind of employee versus employer / entrepreneur is really up for grabs, isn't it, right now?
Yes.
There's a lot of people who have seen something that has been so dominant in their life and so almost steady and secure, just thrown up in the air over the last year.
Exactly.
Particularly, that there are people for whom that life was always going to be their life, who are now thinking about alternatives.
Exactly.
And in terms of the work that you do around sort of coaching and that sort of thing, how do you kind of help people along that early process into early success?
One of the things, you've really put your finger on the reason, I think, for the explosion in 2008, and frankly, in the dot-com bubble that burst in 2000. That was sort of the beginning of it, I think, when people began to realize that these corporate jobs that seemed so safe and secure were anything but. And over time, I began to see, and a lot of my clients began to see, even those that weren't inherently entrepreneurial, that the risk was actually greater working for someone else when they controlled your destiny than it was when you started your own business and you controlled your destiny. At one point in America, at least, it was overwhelmingly, the pendulum swung with respect to security, swung towards corporate work. But over the last 20 years, at least, it's gone the opposite direction. And now with COVID, if you hadn't gotten the message in 2008, or in 2000, you certainly got the message in 2020.
Screamed at you in 2020.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the conversations that I try to remind clients of, is that they really have more control over their destiny this way. And Um, I never try to convince anybody to be an entrepreneur. They always, by the time they get to me, they want to, they have been doing it. But the thing that I do try to remind people of is that, the good news is that you alone have a lot of control. And the bad part is you're alone, or it feels alone. It can, as they say, be very lonely at the top. And that's a lot of the role that I play, or, a mastermind group would play, or any informal mentor or advisor would play, is to try to defeat that echo chamber problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we talk about the hard work, we say about, and it is, there's no getting away from it. And I think what's interesting as well, looking back over the last year, is how even those corporate jobs have started to invade your kind of personal life, so actually that war between work and home now, for entrepreneurs, was never really there, but now even for employees has become very, very blurred.
Exactly.
Where do you see the kind of fun stuff? What is it that kind of actually gets people, thinking, do you know what, that actually this is great. I love this.
Yeah, I think it's the freedom, and particularly for today's generation of entrepreneurs, for anyone, I think the freedom is very appealing. But particularly for millennials and Gen Z, and probably for everybody once they sort of get a taste of it, but definitely for the current generation of entrepreneurs, there is the freedom to not only run your own business, but to run it from anywhere in the world you want to run it, and really so that the work-life balance, kind of a false narrative in my view, that there's a distinction somehow. And people are beginning to realize that, especially if you're working at home for a corporation right now, you realize I could be anywhere. And as long as I could be anywhere as an entrepreneur too. And
my own stuff.
Exactly. And working probably not as hard, and probably making more money, and probably enjoying it a lot more. Yeah. So it's going to be, when I think of some of my corporate clients who have employees, the value proposition to employees has got to get a lot richer if they expect to be effective recruiters and to retain these folks over time.
Yeah, and I think that's true. For those of us running businesses with employees as well, is we've got to get a lot sharper about that value proposition to them, and because otherwise, isn't the best people, or the people that that can help to really spark and underpin what you're doing as an entrepreneur, are just going to be off doing their own thing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so, again, it's not for the faint of heart. Entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart at all. Anyone who's done it knows that. But by the same token, it's I think easier and more incented now, inadvertently, by employers. We do a lot of work with our entrepreneurial clients to try to prevent and help companies recover from burnout. Over the last year, the rate of burnout is, according to the Gallup people who measure corporate burnout for employees, the rate of burnout has tripled, and the cost to employers is very significant. The loss of people, if you get a reputation for being a sweatshop, let's say, which today is easy to do, your ability to retain or to recruit people in the first place, much less retain them, is just, the challenge is much greater. So, and this is again, when people measure the risk of being an entrepreneur versus the burnout of what I'm currently doing, the choice isn't as hard as it used to be. It really isn't. And also, I was talking to somebody the other day about all of the business propositions or business concepts you can subscribe to and become today online. And one of my favorite stories is, there's a guy in the Miami, Florida area who retired as a policeman, put his entire pension into, we call them in the US bounce houses, but these inflatable like castles and things that people have.
Oh, bouncy castles, yeah.
Bouncy castles. Yeah.
Bouncy castles we call them over here. Yeah.
So somebody convinced him, this is a fabulous idea. You should get a bouncy castle. And he had always been a policeman and had no experience in business. So he took his entire pension and he bought 3 or 4 bouncy castles. Wow. And then he had them and he thought, oh God, how am I going to make money? He didn't have the slightest idea. He thought they'd kind of rent themselves, having no business experience. So he got online and started talking to other bouncy castle owners who were just as mystified, a lot of them, as he was. And he finally was able to create by sort of scar tissue research, he was able to identify best practices, and people started calling him for help. And he got his bouncy castle business to work, and then worked very well, and then be very successful. So people were calling him, and he became the bounce house whisperer. And he now, I've wanted to interview this guy. You should try to Google him.
Oh, you know what? I'm gonna have to find him.
Right, but I couldn't get it done, and I kind of gave up. But anyway, he's the bounce house whisperer, and he makes huge 7 figures, coaching, selling courses on a subscription basis, and so on. But there's a subscription, it seems, for almost any business now. There's a way to hack your way past a lot of the risk and a lot of the early mistakes. You can really avoid so many of them. So for entrepreneurs that aren't quite as daring, it's sort of like a franchise might have been in the past.
Yeah.
A little less hand-holding, a lot less cost, but actually a lot of support. And so if anybody out there is interested in bouncy castles, it can be done. Yeah.
Fantastic. I can see a lot of people just going, do you know what? I always wanted to get into bouncy castles. So yeah, congratulations. This is the right place to be. You've heard it here.
That's right.
Brilliant. And I mean, obviously, that as you say, that there's a lot more support online. And I always say to clients, that there is no better time ever to become an entrepreneur than right now, because in this world, you and I can talk across continents. You can find out pretty much anything you need to about anything.
Exactly. And instantly.
It's just exactly that, right? And that is truly from. There is the overwhelm, the opposite of that, which is I just don't know what to do because there's too much of it, which is where curation comes in. And I know your business is about that, and certainly so is mine. When you think back to when you were sort of starting up, and then the kind of immediate lessons that you were learning on the hoof, and I love your phrase about the scar learning and scar tissue. What was the best piece of advice that you got, do you think, in your early stages?
I think it really goes back to the idea of making it all about. I had an advertising agency for a long time, and I had a very wise business partner, and his mantra was make it about them. And because sometimes I would make it all about Scott, make it all about my ego in some way or another, and what I wanted to do and so forth. And he would always wisely recommend that I make it about them. And this kind of goes back to the original point. I mean, the nuts and bolts of starting a business are now easier than they've ever been. So to that extent, I agree. There's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur. The heavy lifting, though, is to actually be able to offer value. Because one of the problems now with you and I can reach across continents instantly and easily, but that also means we could compete with each other easily. And so now I've got worldwide competitors, not just in my little market, but I'm competing against coaches worldwide. And so what that means is I've got to be better, at what I do than ever. And I think the path to that, it really is to make it about them, make it about the customer. And, and again, this is a blessing and a curse for entrepreneurs, but many of us have pretty overblown egos. And it's really important to put that into perspective, because the nuts and bolts of starting the business are easy, but getting the value proposition right and having genuine bona fide solutions is essential. If you're a phony, you'll be found out in record time because of the internet. Our hometown hero, Warren Buffett, here in Omaha, Nebraska, says that when the tide goes out, when the tide goes out, you see who's skinny dipping. And in this day of the internet and ubiquitous information, the tide goes out very fast if you're not for real and if you can't really solve problems. So the nuts and bolts are easy. The value proposition and really delivering on that and serving a discrete audience in a super powerful, demonstrable way, that's hard. Harder than ever, I think, because again, we compete against all of whatever we do, all bouncy house owners worldwide in a way. Maybe less so there because you can't move the bouncy castles. But
That's physical limitation.
yeah,
but I think that's really interesting. And one of the things again that we focus in on is this kind of niching where you go, right,
yes,
don't try and go whole of market. Don't try and go for everything because you will miss everything. You know, what is your particular skill set? What are you really fascinated by? What's your why? You know, the great book by Simon Sinek, Start with Why. You know, that to me, and you said it as well, it's about solving that problem. It's about why you're solving the problem.
Yes.
Do you sense that, and I know you're a mental health professional, you're qualified as well, and do you find that some of the challenges that entrepreneurs are dealing with now are different to that they were dealing with perhaps when there was more physical contact and so on? Or is it pretty much the same?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it depends a bit on the generation. You know, my children who are millennials have a very easy time of establishing relationships, establishing trust and confidence by texting even. For me, that'd be a bit more of a reach. And so, but still the credibility issue is, and the trust issue is always going to be with us. And you know, particularly, I coach people all over the world, mostly in North America, but some in the UK, some in Australia. And for these folks to trust me as their entrepreneur coach takes doing, you know. So to be able to become trusted, not just known, not just awareness created, but to be trusted is a super big challenge now, and much more so than when we could get together for coffee. Even in our own little towns where we live. So that's a big part of it. And I also agree with you that because there is so much competition, being all things to all people is deadly. And so maybe not as narrow a niche as the bouncy castle guru, but maybe not. That's not a terrible idea because there is so much competition. And also that there, as they say, there really are riches in niches. I wrote a book called Narrow Thinking that's about narrow niche, the philosophy of narrow niching. If anybody wants it, I can give you the link and they can have it. But
please ping it over and I'll make sure it's in the notes to this podcast for sure.
I'm a big believer in that for sure. I owned for years an advertising agency that was sort of a generalist, sort of an agency. And we always, we did all right, but we were always struggling to win new clients, mainly because we were all things to all people. Then we made a very conscious decision to focus on really two very narrow niches. And that's when our business took off, because all of a sudden we were significant and in fact leaders in these niches. And in one, we were actually the number one agency worldwide in this particular category. And you can do that. You can own a niche if you take dead aim and you really understand the audience and can genuinely solve their problems. But to be all things to all people today is really deadly. And that's one of the other, I think, biggest traps. When I look at a lot of client websites, frankly, I do a lot of work with advertising agency owners. And when I look at their homepages, I think there's no reason here for me to work with you. It's well designed, but there's nothing here that distinguishes you. And it's so paradoxical for an advertising agency whose whole stock and trade is differentiation, and for their websites to be absolutely generic. So that's, I think, the second principle. Niches are really important today.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And thank you. Listen, Scott, I'd love to carry this conversation on all day, but unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it now. Just a quick couple of questions, if before you go, if I may.
Sure.
Do you have an inspiration or somebody that that you kind of think that kind of person is somebody to look up towards?
Boy, that's a good one. Well, I mentioned Warren Buffett earlier, and it's funny because I live in Omaha. Just about everybody understands value investing. I mean, whether you're a kid or an adult or a farmer, everybody
The
understands
teacher at
buy and
school.
hold, and you know, and a lot of people can quote Buffett. It's interesting. But he, to me, is a very admirable guy. And one of the things it's so true today with the ubiquity of information. He says, never do anything that you don't want on the front page of the New York Times. And today, especially, you could be on the cover of the New York Times or some blog or some Facebook post or whatever. Buffett to me is just such a great combination of incredible mind and incredible ethics.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And yeah, he's very, very much respected this side of the Atlantic as well. I think he's a very, as you say, ethical investor, and somebody that we do look up to as well. Brilliant. I'm trying to work out what time is that over with you at the moment? Is it very, very early in the morning?
No, it's just we're 6 hours earlier than London time, I think. And so it's 9 a.m. here. Is it 3 there?
No. Yep. So no, I thought I was hoping it wasn't going to be too.
Yeah, 6 hours.
So yeah, what are you guys? What are you up to? Not too bad. What are you up to today? Are you guys in lockdown? Out of lockdown?
I'll be talking to a lot of clients today. Wednesday is a big client call day. I talk to each of my clients once a week, and my one-to-one coaching clients, and I'm talking to a lot of them today, so that'll be fun. Check and see how they're doing and so forth.
Good, brilliant. Well, listen, I'm so grateful you making time, Scott. Before all of that, this is Scott Anderson of Doubledare, and do go and check him out. Scott, how can anybody listening into this reach you?
The best way is my website, which is doubledareyou.us, doubledareyou.us, and so please hit me up there. A lot of free information, and you can schedule a free session if you're interested. The other link, and I'll email this to you, Mal, is for our narrow thinking book on niche marketing, and I'll send you a link to that. And if anybody wants that, they can also have that.
That's brilliant. I think that's so important. I think, as you say, in this day and age, to make sure you get your niche right and make sure you're really targeting people. So, Scott, thank you once again. Really great to spend time with you. Thanks for all of your insights. Hope to catch up again real soon. And good luck and stay safe out there as well.
Cheers.